Welcome, everybody. Bonjour, Kwe. My name is Jody Buchholz, Manager of Local Immigration Partnership of Lanark and Renfrew County, and I'm pleased to be here to open today's event, How Rural Communities Can Address Racism to Create More Welcoming Spaces for Newcomers, as part of our ongoing speaker series. A couple of housekeeping items. Along the bottom of your screen, you'll find a chat button. Feel free to use this feature if you have comments that you'd like to share with your fellow attendees today. If you have any questions for us, you can type them into the Q&A tab along the bottom of your screen. We'll allow for good time to answer as many questions as we can while staying within our time together. Today's session is being recorded so that we can continue to share the knowledge and expertise covered today. The Local Immigration Partnership aims to strengthen the role of local communities across Lanark and Renfrew counties in integrating and serving our newcomer population. Local immigration partnerships are funded by Immigration, Refugee, and Citizenship Canada, a department of the Government of Canada, and support communities in bringing together service providers, settlement agencies, community groups, employers, and other key municipal organizations to create a welcoming and inclusive community for newcomers. Today's focus is important as research shows that many small and rural communities in Canada are struggling to maintain their population numbers due to a variety of reasons like youth outmigration, declining birth rates, and an aging population. In response to those challenges, attracting new residents to settle in smaller centers can be used as a strategy to revitalize rural areas. Being a welcoming community means focusing on creating connections between newcomers and established community members. This can help in eliminating barriers to social and economic integration and addressing racism and discrimination. Before we welcome our speaker today to take us further into this conversation, I want to acknowledge that Local Immigration Partnership of Lanark and Renfrew County is situated on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin people. Yasir is also joining us from the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin people. Local Immigration Partnership is working towards reconciliation, and this acknowledgement is just a small reminder of that large commitment. With this in mind, we respectfully thank the Indigenous people for hosting us on their ancestral lands. Miigwech, thank you. With those thoughts shared and a willingness to learn, let me properly introduce today's dynamic speaker, Yasir Naqvi. For over 2 years, Yasir Naqvi has led the Institute for Canadian Citizenship, Canada's leading voice on active citizenship and inclusion. A first-generation Canadian, Mr. Naqvi is recognized by his peers as a strong community leader, as an active board member for the United Way of East Ontario, leading the United Way for All program, and an advisory council member for Ottawa Local Immigration Partnership. His contributions to his community are undeniable. Prior to joining the ICC, Mr. Naqvi served as a member of provincial parliament for almost 11 years, representing a downtown, urban, and diverse community in Ontario, or Ottawa, Ontario. In that time, he served as the Attorney General of Ontario, Government House Leader, the Minister of Labour, and the Minister of Community Safety and Correction Services. He is also the 2019 recipient of the Lincoln M. Alexander Award from the Law Society of Ontario. Welcome, Yasir.
Thank you very much, Jody, for your very kind introduction, and good morning to everyone. I'm greatly honored to have the opportunity to speak to you through the platform that is being made available by the Local Immigration Partnership of Lanark and Renfrew. I wish we were meeting in person, where we could have been in a space, perhaps over some coffee and muffins. But this is an important moment in our time, given the pandemic, and everyone's safety and well-being is extremely important. So I hope wherever I'm reaching to you, you are well, you are safe, and so are your loved ones. I've been given the task today to speak to you a little bit about how we can build more welcoming communities when it comes to rural and smaller communities. How can we collectively stand against racism, be it casual or systemic in nature? Let me start by my story. I came to Canada over 30 years ago, 32 years ago to be precise. A day I remember just like yesterday. It was Christmas Eve, 1988, when my family and I landed at Toronto Pearson Airport from Karachi, Pakistan, the country that I was born in. My parents both are lawyers, are now retired by profession, and lived a fairly comfortable life in Pakistan. But there was something missing for them that compelled them to pursue a better life in a country like Canada. My parents were involved in pro-democracy movement in Pakistan. As a result, they were active. They participated in civic, and non-violent political activities to ensure that a country like Pakistan at that time have free and democratic elections and could pursue democracy like what we enjoy here in Canada. My dad, in fact, participated in a political protest, fully knowing that he may get arrested for standing against the military regime at that time and asking for free and fair elections to be held. And that's exactly what happened. He was arrested. I still have a copy of his charge sheet because he was tried in a military court. And that charge sheet clearly says that he was provoking people to have a right to vote. Imagine that. That still happens in many countries around the world. As a result, he was, as I mentioned, tried and sentenced, and he spent 9 months as a political prisoner. I was 10 years old at that time, and you can imagine what kind of a profound impact that part of my life has had on me up to today. I remember visiting my dad every weekend along with my mother and my siblings, roughly 200 kilometers away from where we lived. I recall my mother's pursuit to secure his basic human rights while he was imprisoned. And of course, a family's struggle to keep connection. We were not alone. But that, once my father was released, that really, I think, set in motion a thought process for my parents to pursue a better and more open and free life. I've asked my father often, why did he decide to move to Canada? And his answer has been that he wanted his children to become citizens of the world. And I said that I did not really understand when I was younger, but I think I have a far better perspective today as to what he meant. What he meant is to be able to enable his children to be able to do anything and everything they want, to be able to live in a society which is based on rules, where rights are protected and opportunities is a matter of hard work. So he decided, along with my mother, to come to Canada. He truly did make my brother, sister, and I a citizen of the world. No doubt about that. You ask my mother, what was her reason to come to Canada? And you get a slightly different answer. Her answer is always been because she wanted that my sister, her daughter, be equal to my mother's two sons. At home, where we lived, my sister was treated equally at home. But as soon as we left home, that was not the case. And my mother's desire was to live in a place where women's rights are protected, are guaranteed, and they're equal to men. So we're here in Canada. I share this story not because it's unique. In fact, it's actually the opposite. I share this story because it is quite a common thread that we find in people who come to Canada. And I'm not just speaking of people who have coming to Canada more recently, but through the successive generations. If we get to know our story, we will find that we have far more in common than divides us. Whether we came 6 generations ago or 6 years ago, many of the reasons for people to leave their home, they leave their families, their support structures are quite identical. It is that pursuit to build a better life. It is that desire to give an opportunity for our children to be more successful. Which leads me to the second point, which is if we know our story, and we should make the effort to know our story as to how we came here, of course, with the exception of the indigenous people who've lived on this land for thousands and thousands of years, then we should also share our stories. So exactly we can see what's common in us. We at the Institute for Canadian Citizenship spend a lot of our time in creating venues, opportunities, fora to allow people to share our respective stories, to find those common threads that exist in human experience, that exist in the Canadian experience, in particularly the Canadian immigration experience. And one of the ways we at the Institute for Canadian Citizenship facilitate sharing of stories is by hosting citizenship ceremonies across the country. Now, I'm talking a bit pre-pandemic when we were able to come together at a big, large public venue, indoors or outdoors, depending on the time of the year, and sit around, get some coffee, and welcome each other, and especially those who are becoming Canadian citizens, to welcome them into the Canadian family. And one of the unique things we do at citizenship ceremonies is what we call roundtable discussions. Our citizenship ceremonies at the Institute for Canadian Citizenship are not just about taking the oath, as much as is extremely important and a legal requirement, but an opportunity for people to connect and to share their stories. So we invite local community leaders to come and host tables. We invite, of course, those individuals who soon will be becoming part of the Canadian family by virtue of becoming Canadian citizens, their family and friends, because they all have a support network. This is a big party that we want to enjoy. And we convene and curate a discussion, a conversation. And that discussion and that conversation is about your Canadian experience. As I said before, it doesn't matter whether your family came 6 generations ago or just 6 years ago, to find a way as to what it means to be a Canadian citizen, what it means, what are those experiences. Of course, people start with winter and people talk about the Tim Hortons coffee, the common things that as Canadians we share, but the conversations get deeper and they get more meaningful because we start to explore and understand our reasons for making Canada our home. Not only that, you start to hear about the dreams, the aspirations, the pursuit of opportunities that people want as a result. And I've had moments where I've been part of these conversations and with a community leader, and that community leader has said, I wonder why my ancestors came to Canada, because they have not just had taken the moment to trace back their story of their great grandmother who may have come from Scotland. And those who do know realize that the reasons were pretty much the same. A lot of women came from different parts of the world, from England, Ireland, Scotland, from Eastern Europe, in earlier waves of immigration, because they wanted equal status. They wanted to build their own lives. They came as nurses and teachers and built their lives. Many are doing today, but they're just coming from a different part of the world. Let me share a story with you that I heard that had an incredible impact on me, and I think it may help illustrate the point I'm trying to make. We were having a ceremony in Toronto. I believe it was at the Toronto Reference Library. And as I mentioned, we do these roundtable discussions. And after the roundtable discussions, we invite at least one person from each table to come and share a story, a reflection, or whatever that was discussed at the table. These are at times quite emotional because you really get to see people's gratitude, people's emotions when they come to the microphone and share their thoughts with a large group of people. So we're at Toronto Reference Library, and we invited people from each table, at least a person from each table, to come forward and say something. A young woman came. She was originally from Iran, as she described herself. She must have been in her early to mid 30s. She was wearing a headscarf, just loosely over her head, as is the custom in that country for many people. And she was shaking, she was trembling. You could tell clearly that public speaking was not something that she does on a regular basis. And in her hand, she held her newly acquired certificate of Canadian citizenship. She'd just become Canadian citizen. And she stood there and she talked about how this is a moment that she has been looking for all her life. And then she did something and said something that will stay with me for a very long period of time. She looked up. She looked at a man who was sitting there. I don't know the relationship she had with that man. Could have been father, could have been husband, could have been a boyfriend, could have been just been a friend. But she glanced at him. And then she looked at the entire audience and she said, "Today, for the very first time, I feel that I am a person." Think about that for a moment. This woman in her early 30s, after becoming a Canadian citizen, says that that was the first time she felt that she was a person. I had tears streaming through my eyes because I realized the power of that citizenship, the document that she held, and the impact she immediately felt. We don't know her past. We don't know her challenges. We don't know what she has gone through. But it was clear listening to her that she sees a world of opportunity in front of her by virtue of the fact that for the first time she felt like an equal. Now you think back about the famous five who struggled so hard back in early 1900s to have women recognized as a person in Canada. Those five women have not, who knows, I don't think they must have even thought about this particular woman from a part of the world that was not part of our reality back in 1919. But that is the connection. And that is the powerfulness of that citizenship. I'm so glad that we create those opportunities for sharing stories, because I'm sure it probably is resonating with you. It resonated with so many people. So it's important for us to know our stories, but it is also extremely important, in my view, to share our stories, because when we do share our stories, we find that we have far more in common than not. And once we can figure out things that are common in us, we can then work towards focusing on or working on the differences and understanding those differences and appreciating those differences. Because that's what inclusive societies are about. Inclusive societies, and I think Canada is a rare model of it around the world, is about accepting the fact that every single one of us is different. No two human beings are alike. In an inclusive society, we need to recognize that we're different. We need to understand and learn of our differences. But then most importantly, we need to celebrate those differences. That's how we build inclusive societies. And in my personal view, that's how we actually enrich ourselves. If we were all the same, I think we'll be a bit of a boring lot. That diversity allows us to be that much more rich, and that inclusion allows us to celebrate that richness. Let me come to you to the moment in time we're living in. And as much as we are focusing in this moment around the pandemic on the negative aspect, I want to highlight to you some real opportunities that exist for communities like Lanark County and Renfrew County. The pandemic has been difficult. It continues to be challenging, even though there is light at the end of the tunnel with vaccinations taking place across the country in big cities, towns, and small communities. It has impacted a lot of people. I think we'll all agree, it's widely accepted that the pandemic has had a disproportionate impact on certain groups of people. We often speak of we are all in this together. Yes, we are all in this together, but some of us are more impacted by this than the rest. Those who we've known have been vulnerable and marginalized in our community are the ones who have suffered and continue to suffer the most. On the top of the list, unfortunately, is our elders. We know women have been disproportionately impacted. We know that Indigenous, Black, and people of color who have had challenges around marginalization are also impacted more than the rest of us. So this pandemic didn't create new set of problems. It definitely magnified, in my view, the existing problems. And it has given us an opportunity to ensure that those differences, those marginalization that have existed, that we work on them and we work together to eradicate them. Now, everybody is talking about that this pandemic, and as we get out of this public health challenge, that opportunity for us is to build a resilient economy. And I don't disagree with that. It is an opportunity for us to learn from this pandemic and to build a resilient economy where we are in a better place to sustain this type of challenge in the future. But I also suggest to you that we cannot just stop at building a resilient economy. We need to couple that by building an inclusive communities as well. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that our resiliency will be emboldened if we are inclusive, if we do not leave anybody behind. We often are talking about building back better. We cannot build back better if we build the same. If we rebuild the structures that had left some vulnerable or marginalized, starting from our elders, then we haven't really learned any new lessons. So in order for us to build a resilient economy, we need to ensure that they are inclusive in nature, that they do not leave anyone behind, that they do actually pay particular attention to women, to Indigenous people, to people who are Black, and people of color. And that will require focusing on those systemic issues, those barriers that a lot of these communities have faced for a long time. This is our opportunity to crack those systemic barriers so that people are part of it. Now, I think that rural communities are in a much better place to take advantage of this opportunity. For a simple reason, rural communities are much friendlier communities to begin with by sheer size. You go to any rural community, any small community, and you see that everyone knows everyone. There's a level of collegiality that exists in smaller communities than you may see in bigger cities. And it just could be just the virtue of size and scope, but also a little bit about culture. And I think rural communities in Ontario and across Canada have an opportunity to say, we're going to champion that rebuilding of inclusive communities. We are going to welcome people from different parts of the world, because that is not only in our economic interest, because we don't want our smaller communities get smaller. We want our rural communities to get richer and bigger and more prosperous. So not only we are going to welcome people, but we are going to go and share our values of community, of being one, of sharing things with each other. So I think that that friendliness that exists, that I have experienced in small communities, in rural communities in Ontario, and I live in Ottawa, I know Lanark and Renfrew counties really well. You feel a sense of always you visit that you kind of belong here, that you want to live here. If you can harness those and take the lead in building those inclusive communities post-pandemic, I think smaller communities like yours will be teaching the rest of us how this could be done. And this is the opportunity for you to roll out the red carpet. Government of Canada has announced that they're going to be welcoming 1 million new people into Canada over the next 3 years. And they're right to do so. We need new talent. We need new people in Canada. They are going to come from all parts of the world. A lot of them are going to be young and savvy and tech-oriented. And they're going to come for many reasons that we were sharing earlier in the earlier part of this conversation, which is to build a better life, which is to build a prosperous future for themselves and their families. Now, we should also be mindful of the fact that Canada is not the only country in the world who's trying to attract new people, new talent. It's gotten actually quite a competitive marketplace now when it comes to countries like Canada wanting people to come. So how do we win that race, if I can put it in those words? How could we keep ourselves competitive? And the way we keep ourselves competitive is, especially in a post-pandemic world, is by smaller communities opening their arms and saying that we believe in fairness, we believe in equality, we believe in respect, and we are actually inclusive communities. And as a result, we're resilient, and we work at this together because we do not leave anyone behind. That is our opportunity. And so when those 1 million or so people come into Canada in the next 3 years, let's make sure that smaller communities get their fair share of those people coming into smaller communities like Lanark and Renfrew counties and make their home there. I don't think this is a pipe dream. I think that is completely doable, and it is within our reach and in our hands. So I will, I'm mindful of time, leave the following message with you. Reach out, share your stories, share your values, share your traditions, share your cultures, and understand other people's values, understand other people's cultures, understand other people's desires and dreams. And I think if we are able to do those three things, we will find that we actually have a lot in common. And those differences that exist actually makes us far more richer and compassionate and understanding. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope I was able to leave some thoughts for you this morning. And in conversation with Jody, I hope to answer a few questions that you may have. Thank you. Merci, Miigwech.
Thank you so much, Yasir, for your insight, your candor, and your guidance today. As you mentioned, we'll now move into our formal part of the Q&A portion. So if you haven't already done so, there is the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. So now is your chance to ask questions. And judging from some of the questions that we already have submitted, the next portion of our session is going to continue to be very insightful. So Yasir, our first question is, you mentioned Indigenous people and their traditional place here in Canada. It is a given, at least in our question, the person who asked that question, in their mind, that there is a systemic and in some cases, personal racism in Canada against Indigenous people, as well as immigrants other than European colonial settler types. Do you think there is a structural or significant difference in the racism experienced by those two groups of people?
The short answer, Jody, is yes. Racism towards Indigenous people and bias towards Indigenous people is just not limited to the original settlers on this land. You see both systemic and casual racism in all different communities, unfortunately. One of the common thing that I've heard when you speak to new Canadian citizens about reconciliation is, I come from a colonized background myself. This is not the problem I created. It was the Anglos and the Francos who did this. And my response always, and the response at the Institute for Canadian Citizenship, is that that's not the right answer, because we have now decided to live on their Indigenous people's ancestral land. It's their generosity, maybe not voluntary, where we are now building better lives. So it is our responsibility to engage in the process of reconciliation. So as part of the work that we do at the Institute for Canadian Citizenship, Jody, is stress the fact that one of the key responsibilities of being a citizen is to, one, know the truth about colonization, to educate oneself, and many new Canadians, newcomers, don't have that opportunity, of course. So we need to make sure that in our schools curriculum, in adult language classes, in settlement services, in all those places, there is an element of education around the colonial past, and two, engage in the process of reconciliation. So I come back to the point I made. It doesn't matter whether you came 6 generations ago or 6 years ago. As a citizen, you're responsible. It's part of your responsibility to engage in that process of reconciliation. And in fact, I argue if you have come from a colonial background, you should be even more empathetic to the plight of the Indigenous people. And we will not prosper as a country, as a society, if the original inhabitants of this land are left behind. We cannot seek equality and inclusion for ourselves if we left the original people of this land unequal and not included in the society. So I think it goes hand in hand, and it's something that we all have to collectively work on, and no matter how long have you lived in Canada.
And to your point too, it was great to see the announcement that IRCC is going to be modifying the Citizenship Study Guide to also include some more content around marginalized groups in Canada as well. So that is really wonderful. Our next question is,
and Jody, I would also add, and you know, there's a bill in front of the House of Commons right now to also amend the Oath of Citizenship. Right now, the Oath of Citizenship has no mention of Indigenous people. And one of the calls for action by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was to amend the oath to recognize that we live on indigenous land, that the First Nations, the Inuit and the Métis people were here before us, and that we're treaty people. And the wording that has been suggested is a very good first step, because once that becomes into law, there will be the first opportunity for new Canadian citizens to take an oath and say we're treaty people, right? And creates that legal obligation, so to speak, and recognition that we have a role to play in reconciliation.
I had the privilege of attending a speaker series led by Algonquin College's Waterfront campus on Tuesday evening, where His Honor Murray Sinclair spoke to the fact that we need to be reflective and we need to ask ourselves, what is our creation story, so that we can get into that mindset of truth and reconciliation, and really from a newcomer's perspective and from a settler's perspective, consider those calls to action 93 and 94 as they relate to the newcomer population. So it's great to see that there is progress being made.
Absolutely.
So our next question is, are there funds being streamed to attract newcomers to settle in rural areas?
I believe so. I think IRCC, Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada are quite keen about making sure that when people come into Canada, they're just not locating into major centers across the country, that there is a more proportionate opportunity for them to live across the country, including smaller communities. So there are various programs, local immigration partnerships type of initiatives is an effort in that regards. I think these programs are important because they allow for communities to be more welcoming, and as I said, roll out the red carpet and welcome these people. But in the end of the day, I think it's also creating those economic opportunity to make sure that people feel that they are moving into in a welcoming place where there are economic opportunity for them and for their families. We know there's ample studies that have been done that immigration actually bolsters the economy, that it actually has an incredible economic ripple effect, so to speak. So it's a two-way street, and I think there's a great advantage to be gained here by smaller communities to welcome newcomers, and for those newcomers to build their lives as well. Even if they may be commuting to a bigger center, I mean, many people from the counties go into Ottawa or the outskirts of Ottawa for employment opportunities. And that is fine, that they live there and then they spend their hard-earned dollars into services and goods in the local community. So that work is happening at the government level, but I think my message today is that it has to be done at a community level as well, because the community has to be welcoming. The community has to be wanting for people from different backgrounds to come and live among themselves. I think that's how we will make sure that that rural communities are also benefiting from this very important influx of new people who have been coming into Canada and will continue to come into our country.
Yes, sir. How do you think that rural communities that maybe lack settlement services, how can they be strategic in recruiting, if you will, newcomers to their area that have the skills that align with the gaps, the employment gaps, which we hear time and time again, at least in our counties, that there just aren't the skill sets needed to fill some of the jobs. So how, without there being a formal settlement agency, how can we better align to meet those, to fill those gaps?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that need to be done. One, of course, identifying what those skill sets are, what are those gaps are, and I would say second thing would be is building partnerships. You're right. You may not need to replicate all the settlement services in a smaller community, but you can easily partner with settlement organizations in Kingston and Ottawa, for example, when we talk about your respective counties, to create those channels or those pipelines. to meet those gaps, right? So I think there's those opportunities. I would never undermine the great work the local community service organizations that already exist in these communities are doing. You don't need to be a standalone, set-aside settlement organization to do this work. I think there is ample opportunity, and I fully recognize that those people are quite busy in doing the work they're doing. But I think it goes hand in hand, right? Is to grow that population base, to make sure that everybody in the community have the important community and social services they need. And so that aspect, along with appropriate partnerships from larger centers that may exist where you are, could meet that gap. But I think identification of the skill sets that are missing and being really proactive about it. The communities, the smaller communities, and there are a few stories in particularly from Atlantic Canada, who have been very successful in attracting newcomers into their communities, have been able to do so that because they really went into it like a marketing campaign. They really put in a lot of effort. They went out of their way of saying to people, come live in our small town, right? A lot of these small towns, newcomers did not know about. I mean, when people come to Canada, they know Toronto, they know Montreal, they know Calgary, they know Vancouver, right? They may know Halifax, not St. John's or St. John, right? I mean, that is the knowledge. But once they come here, and if you know the skill sets you're looking, and you have the right partnership, I think the next step is not to just be passive about it and wait and hope that somebody will stumble upon on a website where they will see, oh, there's these opportunities and I'm going to go and live there. I think it will require more active engagement in getting and recruiting people to come. And again, many examples have shown, Jody, that when newcomers have moved into smaller communities, they don't move out. They fall in love with those communities, just like a lot of us who live in smaller communities love everything about being small, the nature, no rush hour. You find the same thing, but getting them requires some effort and work.
So our next question is, how have you seen rural community members be allies and promote belonging and inclusivity for newcomers in their community? Any best practices?
We all like to celebrate. Again, I'll come back. I know I'm repeating myself. There's so much in common that divides us, right? We all have, first of all, we have life events. We have life events that are identical no matter where we come from starting from birth to death. And we all have certain rituals and practices, but they're very much alike. And it brings always people together. I mean, that just goes to the most raw human experience. So right then and there, there's so much to celebrate, whether the birth of a child or the parting of a loved one, and celebrating their life. And then you've got everything in between, regardless of your ethnicity, regardless of your faith. We have same type of notions that we celebrate. Today, the Muslim community around the globe is celebrating Eid. Eid is like Christmas for Muslims. It's one of the biggest festival and holidays. Imagine if you're in a smaller community on the main street, just like you celebrate Christmas, why would you not celebrate Eid as well? Who doesn't like a party, right? And why would you not, even you may have a handful of Muslim families, make them feel that their celebration is our celebration. There's no stronger message of inclusion and belonging than sharing at that level. So, I think it makes us richer, and it makes the community richer. I become fond of saying that you cannot legislate inclusion and belonging. It's a human experience that people work on it together. At times, it's hard work, but it's very simple acts of kindness that results in that level of belonging. And I think it starts with human experience that we share in common, regardless of which part of the world we come from. Can I
Our
actually
next question
can I share a quick story? I like to have a
please
story.
do.
So my family and I, we actually moved to a small town when we came to Canada. We moved to Niagara Falls, and I will never forget this. That I think we were maybe living in Niagara Falls 2 or 3 months, and we had no friends. And one day, one night, one evening, there was a knock at the door, and we were all startled, like, who's knocking at the door? We don't know anybody who could be knocking at the door. And there was a big kerfuffle, and who's going to go to the door, and who speaks better English than who. And so Dad had to go open the door, right, as many dads do, and open the door. And there was this couple standing with a box of donuts. I think they were Tim Hortons, but can't remember. And it was a couple who knew that a new family have moved in, and they just wanted to come and say hello. And they brought, I don't know, 6 or half a dozen or a dozen donuts. Uncle Joe and Auntie Cleo, who are still part of our lives, Uncle Joe has passed away, became our closest friends because we had not had the experience yet to somebody who's come and said hello. And that small kind gesture changed the world. My first Christmas dinner, my first Thanksgiving dinner, all the traditions that makes Canada, I experienced with them because they opened their home for us. So it does not take a lot to just say hello. And small communities are renowned for those gestures.
That's a wonderful story. And I like how you think Niagara Falls is a small town.
Oh, I know. Relatively speaking.
So our next question is, are there any initiatives to teach inclusiveness in school?
I think it's I think schools are a perfect, if I can say, breeding ground for those type of things, right? And I think it's by celebrating common things. When our kids are back in school, and we see that. I have 2 young children, and we see that where they're celebrating Eid, and they're celebrating Passover, and they're celebrating. They're talking about Holi, and they're talking about all these different festivities that kids will of course be attracted to. But what I really see is my kids coming home and telling me about it, and that just makes my heart glow like anything, because like, Daddy, did you know this? And so I think that's where really our opportunity is. Let's work with our kids. Let's really help shape them, because I think our kids teach us a lot. And if they are picking up things around how to be inclusive, how to be respectful, how to be understanding towards people who may not look the same, I think it will allow us to emulate them and do a lot of the same things.
Mm-hmm. Our next question is, can you speak to any ideas for what specific or significant markers that rural communities can use to ensure we build back better?
Oh, that's a good question. Oh, it's a big question. The marker that I'm using is which I said already, that we build back better by not building back the same. If you find that you are going back to the way we knew it, pause, think, and think about what were the imperfections were in the old normal, right? March 2020, when everything stopped, has now become the old normal. It's not the normal we should be striving for. Humans are known, the reason we're such a resilient species is because we evolve, because we learn. And I think this is our opportunity. This has been such a significant event. We did not know the significance of this event a year ago. But what we know now, and we probably will be living like this probably for the rest of the year, we probably will go back to some sort of normalcy in early new year, once vaccinations is complete, both doses, herd immunity, all those type of things. And there should be a new normal. There should be different ways of doing things. I'm not saying we will abandon our past, but we need to learn from our past to write our future. And so my marker is, if an idea that I'm coming with basically says, remember when you used to do this, and try to do that again. I'm not building back better.
Thank you. Affordable housing is important for new immigrants to come to rural areas. During the pandemic, we've seen an influx of people moving into rural from urban areas, causing the housing prices to triple in price. And we have certainly seen that locally as well. How will the government assist these newcomers in finding a home rurally, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, affordable housing, ownership of housing is a big issue, and of course we've seen a big spike in prices. I'll tell you one thing. One of the things that newcomers, when they come to Canada, they come with a big dream and desire is to own a home, and I think that's shared among all people. But there's something about owning a home that symbolizes security for yourself and for your family. I'm not an economist, Jody, to be able to tell you what will happen with the market. I think my gut tells me there's going to be a correction in the market. I think there's a bit of a artificialness to the kind of spike we've seen, and I'm sure people will correct me if I'm wrong. Government probably will have to utilize some policy tools to find some sort of coolness in the housing market, because we cannot be in an environment where price of home ownership outpays the increase in real wages of people, because that's going to create that significant disparity, not only in just big cities and small communities as well.
So our next question, our guest shares, I have the privilege of working in the immigration services field in central Ottawa and feel I have the tools and structures to be welcoming to immigrants and BIPOC there. However, I live and raise children in Lanark County, where there's much less diversity and oftentimes less openness to diversity. What can we do as only citizens, in quotation marks there, to encourage our small, predominantly white communities to be more welcoming for immigrants and BIPOC?
Yeah, and I think it just go back to the comments I was making, right? Is about focusing on knowing your own story and sort of compelling people to understand their own immigration journey. All of us, with the exception of the indigenous people who've lived on this land for thousands of years, are immigrants, and we should know our immigrant story. I just the way I told you my story, and of course it's fresh for me because I was part of it, and it may not be for you because it was your great grandparents who came. But let's find a way to learn that journey, because I can tell you it was probably even more difficult journey than mine. We hopped on a plane. They probably came through on a ship through a very cold, choppy North Atlantic. And there may be some loss of life, those type of those things. So I think knowing your own story creates a common ground. Then sharing those stories and hearing other people's stories is creates that bond, because this is where, and I've seen it again and again and again, we realize that we're far more in common than divides us. I go back to the story of that new Persian Canadian woman I shared, who felt that she's a person now. How can you not align with that, right? Whether you're small community or big community, how can you not align with that? So I think those are the values, those are the feelings that we need to embrace. And you start small. You start with small acts of gestures. And so, I think one of the things smaller communities should engage in is do a little bit of a scene setting, or I hate to use the word inventory, to see what are the different backgrounds of people who are living, and what are for example, those celebrations or those special milestones in those communities. Can we start doing things? They could be at the Legion, they could be at the church basement, they could be on the main street if the weather is nice, right? Let's find those things and start organizing them. And you may have a slow first year and a little bit of okay the second year, and you will see it will grow because people will have those opportunities to connect.
Mm-hmm. Great point. And it fits into the next question as well. So wondering what your thoughts are on tools rural communities can use to address racism. Would you recommend tools like community surveys on racism to get some data, or resource maps, booklets to assist those who are experiencing racism? And I would like to add to the question, from personal experience, the city of Pembroke and other municipalities within our areas have been working on establishing diversity committees, and I give kudos to the city of Pembroke, who has just done their first community survey to get a sense of who has been experiencing racism within the community. So would you recommend, do you have any things that can be done, maybe done without funding as well?
Yeah,
for consideration.
I think that's a very good question, and I think there's the process piece is important, because you have to identify the problem before try to solve the problem, right? And so what you outline in terms of doing surveys, in terms of doing resource mapping, talking to people to understand what their experience may be around casual and systemic racism is extremely important. I think the other big piece is to create that safe environment, that safe space where people are open, where people are willing to speak out, fully knowing that they will not be isolated, that they will not be scapegoated, that they will be listened to. So I'll tell you one thought that I always have, as I think it works could work so well in smaller communities, which doesn't cost any money, is solidarity, right? If you have an act of racism, be it casual or systemic, if the community stands up and says, this is not acceptable, we need to do better, that's a strong and a loud message. And that just goes to building that inclusive community piece that I was talking about. It's one thing to be resilient as an economy, but it's far more important that we're inclusive in nature, that people feel that they all belong in that community and that we have each other's backs. That's what neighbors do, right? Is we look after each other and we protect each other. And so that inclusiveness is important, because by dividing ourselves in a smaller community, I mean, we're just weakening ourselves. We're not helping anyone. So I think that solidarity, along with the important systemic process that you spoke of, goes a long way. And then our decision makers, people who we elect, whether our school board trustees, our city councilors, our town councilors, our federal and provincial representatives, they will listen to us even more, because they will say, you know what? The community is one on this issue. They will not tolerate. So I think that doesn't cost anything. That's just a human impulse and a human reaction to any kind of injustice.
And that there, I think, is a great point for us to end on as we are approaching the 10 o'clock mark. And I do thank everybody for their questions that they submitted, and we didn't even get to a majority of them. We had some great questions, so thank you very much, everybody. And before we close our speaker session today, I would like to again thank Mr. Naqvi for his time and outstanding talk. I'd also like to thank all the attendees for joining us today. We're looking forward to having you join us for future speaker series sessions. So again, thank you. Merci. Miigwech.